We begin tonight with something that hasn't happened in Virginia in nearly a century.
Death was pronounced at 9:13 p.m. There were no complications.
Welcome to Tyler Medeiros TV. For those of you that are new, make sure you subscribe and turn on post notifications so you don't miss it when I upload. In today's video, we're going to be looking at the strangest last meal requests on death row. The person we're going to be talking about today is a woman named Teresa Wilson Bean Lewis, born April 26, 1969. Teresa would grow up in poverty in Danville, Virginia. At a young age, Teresa would sing at a church, and both her parents didn't make much money working at a textile mill. By the age of 16, Teresa would end up dropping out of school and go on to get married to a man she met while at church. The couple would go on to have a daughter, but the marriage truly didn't last long. The couple would end up getting divorced, and Teresa would turn to alcohol and drugs. Her own mother-in-law would describe her as not right. Teresa would eventually go on to work a bunch of low-paying jobs until she found a job working at a textile mill, just like her parents. While working there, she would get into a relationship with her supervisor of the textile mill in the year 2000. He had 3 kids and recently lost his wife. It wouldn't be long after the relationship began that Teresa and her daughter would move into the house with the man. Soon after they began to live together, the couple would go on to get married. In the year 2001, during the month of December, one of the man's sons would be killed in a car accident, in which the man would receive $200,000 from a life insurance policy. The man would end up using the money to purchase a home that sat on 5 acres of land in Virginia. The man's youngest son would receive $250,000 from an insurance policy before his deployment to Iraq. The young man would make his father and Teresa beneficiaries of the money. It was in the fall of that year that Teresa would meet 2 young men at a Walmart in Danville. She would go on to have a sexual relationship with both of the men. In October of that year, the youngest son of the man would visit home after army training he underwent in Maryland. During his time home, Teresa would give the 2 young men she met and was having relations with $1,200 so they could go and buy a gun and ammunition in the hopes that the 2 young men would then kill the man and his youngest son, so Teresa would be able to obtain the insurance money they received. The 2 young men would attempt to kill Teresa's husband but wouldn't have any success with it. On October 30th, only 1 week later after the first attempt, the 2 young men would enter the trailer of the husband through a back door that was left open by Teresa.
Lewis hired 2 men to kill her husband and stepson. She was hoping to cash in on her son's life insurance policy.
The 2 young men would then shoot both her husband and the youngest son while they were asleep. The son hadn't died right away, so one of the men shot him 2 more times. Teresa would only call for help 45 minutes after the murder was committed. While Teresa was waiting for police to arrive, she took money out of her dead husband's wallet and gave the money to the 2 men before they took off. Police would end up arriving to the scene while her husband was still alive, and as they approached him, he said, "My wife knows who did this to me." Teresa would claim that they were shot by 2 unknown men who broke in. Not long after the murder, Teresa was caught trying to withdraw a sum of $50,000 from her dead husband's account using a check that she had forged. It would only be a week until Teresa would confess to the murders, saying that she had paid 2 young men to have her husband killed. When officials investigated the case, they would uncover evidence that showed that Teresa had been trying to obtain the assets of her husband and stepson before the bodies were even buried. While Teresa was on trial, the judge would confirm Teresa as the mastermind of the killings. He would go on to say that Teresa was the head of the serpent. Teresa would undergo testing from a forensic psychiatrist, which her results came back showing an IQ of 72, with a verbal IQ of 70, and a performance IQ of 79. They would go on to say that Teresa was able to make plea agreements and pleas. Also, 3 different psychologists would diagnose Teresa with dependent personality disorder. During the trial, her defense team would recommend she plead guilty to the charges in order to avoid the case being in front of a jury because of the overwhelming evidence against her. With doing that, they would hope that the judge would be a little more lenient due to Teresa's cooperation with the investigation. Things wouldn't go as they hoped, and Teresa would be sentenced to death. The 2 men who carried out the shooting would go on to receive life sentences.
Many felt Lewis should have been given the same punishment as her co-defendants. The men both got life sentences.
Now, Teresa's daughter would end up being arrested and sentenced to 5 years in prison due to her knowing about the murder plan and not reporting it to officials. In 2004, a private investigator on behalf of Teresa would visit one of the men in prison. The man would write an affidavit which read, "Teresa was in love with me. She was very eager to please me. She was also not very smart." But he would then eat the part of the document that he signed, where he then said, "What will happen will happen." 2 years later, the man would end up taking his own life while in prison. People who support Teresa would go on to say, "Teresa is deeply remorseful and has been a model prisoner, helping fellow female inmates cope with their circumstances." It's said that over 7,300 appeals for clemency were sent to the governor of Virginia at the time. Her father would even go on to talk about how Teresa cared for her mother before her passing. Teresa would go on to make a statement saying, "I just want the governor to know that I am so sorry, deeply from my heart. And if I could take it back, I would, in a minute. I just wish I could take it back. And I'm sorry for all the people I've hurt in the process." On September 17th, 2010, a decision was made to continue on with the execution, due to there being no compelling reason for the execution to be retracted. Teresa would spend her last hours praying and singing religious songs. On September 23rd, 2010, Teresa Wilson Bean Lewis would be executed at 9 p.m. by lethal injection.
The first woman in almost 100 years has been put to death in Virginia. 41-year-old Teresa Lewis was given lethal injection for her part in a 2002 murder-for-hire case.
But before her execution, she was granted a last meal, which consisted of 2 fried chicken breasts, sweet peas with butter, a Dr. Pepper, and an apple pie for dessert. Now, the story doesn't end there. Thousands who supported Teresa would go on to say that they believe her death sentence should have been a life sentence instead, insisting it was unfair that the killers got life sentences, but Teresa suffered death. People also argued that evidence pointed to one of the young men who was in love with her actually being the mastermind behind the plan. That statement would be supported by an affidavit that the other young man wrote, saying, "As between Miss Lewis and Schallenberger, Schallenberger was definitely the one in charge of things, not Miss Lewis." Now, do you think Teresa paid the ultimate price when she shouldn't have? Did the young man want Teresa and the money for himself? Now, I want to know what you guys think down below in the comments, and if you had to choose one last meal, what would your choice be? But I'm going to go ahead and close out today's video here. I hope you guys really enjoyed it. If you did, give it a nice big thumbs up. I really do appreciate it. I want to thank you guys so much for all the love and support that you guys continuously give me. It means the world to me, and I will see you guys in my next video. Peace.